name is Mykhailo Zaslavskyi. I am a PhD at Maria Curie Skłodowska University, Institute of Political Science and Administration in Lublin, Poland. And today I will talk a little bit about Putinism as a new threat for modern international order. So my presentation will be look like at the start it was introduction. Next I will talk a little bit about foreign policy of the Russian Federation in the last 3 decades. Next it's the law in the shadow of war in Ukraine, preventing aggression, maintaining world order, and of course conclusions. So at the start I want to start like that. 80 years after the end of the World War II in Europe, Ukraine is now forced to save not only itself, but also global civilization and the international order from Russian invasion, and it attempts to destroy the international legal system. Russia, of course, is not the first state to invade not only the territory of a neighboring state, but also principles of civilized cooperation and collaboration between states and the established global legal system. However, the current challenge by Russia has a special nature because it is directed at world civilization, international law, and the international legal order by a state that has significant nuclear potential that threatens the existence of all mankind. The time has come to admit that Yalta system of international relations established after World War II is no longer adequate. The Helsinki Final Act and the United Nations Charter did not prevent the new war in Europe. Notions of sovereignty and territorial integrity have long been challenged, but no previous crisis in Europe has witnessed the level of violence of international law that we have seen in the case of Russian aggression against Ukraine over the past decade. In 2014-2015, a journalist asked whether this was beginning of new Cold War or a new world order. And now we have an answer because we witnessed a new global crisis. And the purpose of this presentation is to show and analyze the aggressive policy of the Russian Federation during Vladimir Putin's presidency and the Putinism as an example of a threat for modern international order. Next, the foreign policy of the Russian Federation in the last 3 decades. So the Russian government has long advocated what Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as you can see at the picture, has called the urgent need for an alternative form of collective leadership of the great powers. In a speech he delivered in 2007, Lavrov presented a vision of a world order based on the leadership of the United States, European Union, and Russia. This idea was current and very popular in the mind of Russian ruling elite. The Russian vision of an alternative international order emphasized elements of continuity in Russian foreign policy, partly resulting from historical memory and even seeing itself as a unique civilization with a special and even messianic mission. Russia sees the current international order as a zero-sum game, a victory for the West, or, for example, another great power like China must unavoidably mean a loss for Russia. Therefore, the process of expanding NATO wasn't and is seen as an expansion of Western sphere of influence. But an even bigger problem for Russia than NATO enlargement is actually the democratization process. It is seen not only as a major obstacle to restoring the world order to the rank of the world ruling great powers, but also as a direct threat to the security of Putin's authoritarian regime. The Russian authorities come to this conclusion after the first wave of pro-democracy movements, or as we called color revolutions, that led to the change of several governments in post-Soviet countries in early 2000s, including Rose Revolution in Georgia in 2003, Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and of course Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. The link between the pro-democracy revolutions and the Russian regime security threat became even clearer to the ruling elite during the Arab Spring. The assassination of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and the phenomenon of Arab Spring had a particularly strong impact on Moscow and paralleled the massive anti-Putin protests that erupted in Russia in 2011-2012 in response to the falsified election. After that, Putin has taken a number of steps to prevent democratization at domestic and international levels. For example, including restrictions on freedom of speech and the right to protest, limited internet freedom, destroying and fragmenting political opposition, expanding the legal definition of extremism and spying, making it easier to persecute the dissidents. The imperial syndrome, along with the desire to recover the status of Russian so-called great power, has long prompted Russian leaders to provoke tensions in the former Soviet Union. This pattern was implemented, for example, in 2008 in Georgia, when Russian propaganda labeled the Georgian government as a fascist and provoked and launched a war under a false pretext. Having received no objective assessment and reaction from the international community to its action, which were a gross violation of international law, Russia went further and attacked Ukraine under false pretext, occupying Ukrainian Crimea, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol, imitating a people's referendum, and cynically blockading Ukrainian military units and military warships. But even then, the Western powers' response was rather slow and limited, and the sanctions imposed at the time were limited. The basis for this approach was, of course, unwillingness to worsen relations with the Russian political leadership, since Russia was a source of raw materials and very big market, as well as having a large military force as a significant nuclear arsenal. To divert attention from occupying the Crimea, Russia immediately launched an invasion of Ukrainian Donbas and other regions of Ukraine, mainly eastern and southern. Also, it did so using so-called hybrid methods, hiding the artificial spread of chaos as People's Revolt that actually organized by Russian special forces, and of course making a fake People's Republic. The occupied areas of Ukrainian Donbas and the occupation administration there have been financed by Russia for the past 10 years, and the circulation of Russian ruble in the occupied part of Ukrainian territory is a convincing proof of terrorist financing. The procrastination, fear, and indecision of the Western powers were seen by Russian top political and military leadership only as a weakness and lack of unity of the West, whose opinion could be ignored. It was because of the indecisiveness of Western leaders that the Russian leadership, after considering possible gain and losses, decided to plan an aggressive war against Ukraine and implemented this brazen plan. The law in the shadow of war in Ukraine. So, on February 24, 2022, the Russian Federation committed an armed attack, full-scale attack on Ukraine. Russian Federation claims that, in fact, this, how they call it, a special military operation, специальная военная операция, on Ukrainian territory is based on Article 51 of the United Nations Charter and customary international law. However, the opposite is true. That is, the military actions of Russian Federation qualify as an armed attack under this Article 51 of the United Nations. The military actions of the Russian Federation constitute a clear violation of the prohibition on the use of military forces not carried out with prior approval of the United Nations Security Council, granted after Chapter 7, nor were taken in its self-defense under Article 51, because Ukraine did not attack the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation armed attack on Ukraine was an act of aggression within the meaning of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3314. It defined the aggression in the next way. Aggression is the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations. So, Russia is an aggressor. And what we need to do? Threats to transnational security have been a topic of conversation in recent decades in Europe, covering mainly issues such as criminal activity, terrorism, and soft security. Military security, however, has remained largely to the responsibility and domestic policy of individual states, covering only alliance territory. But last 3 decades have shown many changes. For example, Switzerland joined the sanctions against Russia. Later action was described by Switzerland president as he said, exceptional step. And also Sweden and Finland applying for NATO membership and already became a member of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. For a decade, many skeptics have been talking about the Finlandization of Ukraine, in which accepting Finland neutral status would protect it from possible Russian actions and satisfy Moscow ambitions. But now we were already talked about Ukrainization of Finland, with previously neutral countries adopting a changed understanding of treaties and greater appreciation of alliances, especially the benefits of NATO collective defense. 10 years of Russia's so-called hybrid war against Ukraine and the last 3 years of full-scale war have caused many countries to rethink their military strategy and tactics. The time for learning lesson has already begun, so we need to new organizational and recruitment models. So it's territorial defense, international legions, logistics, surveillance. It is necessary to assess the capabilities and readiness of the forces of many European countries. Second, the classic focus on interoperability, which has been a cornerstone for NATO alliances, can be complemented by the idea of sharing capabilities, specifically the transfer of weapon and ammunition from one country to another in event of a crisis developing. However, Russian war against Ukraine show also that sometimes countries may need arms and ammunition they lack without having to deploy personnel from third countries, as we can see in the war in Ukraine. Ukraine need arms, need ammunition, but we don't need personnel, officially, of course. Another issue is surveillance and communication, as well as the use of unnamed vehicles. While both surveillance asset and combat drones have been in use for a decade, many countries have not paid enough attention to their direct use in war. The practical use of drones in Ukraine have caused many European countries to reconsider their purchase and use. Moreover, the marine dimension of warfare requires an adequate post-war analysis. More attention should be paid to the security of commercial shipping and openness of the ports. Over the past 10 years, an understanding has emerged that military efforts by themselves are not sufficient for state and social security. Civilian defense system is needed to enhance defense capabilities and effectiveness, while providing the necessary willingness to reduce society's risk and fragility in time of war and peace. Increased military-civilian interdependence must not be ignored in any future security and military planning. And in conclusion, as a concluding remark, I want to say that by violating the principles and rules of civilized international communication and coexistence, Russian Federation has demonstrated the ineffectiveness of the international and European system for guaranteeing global peace and international security. The attempt to build a new or modernized security architecture in Europe must begin with lessons learned. Evaluating mistakes and misperception of the adversary, analyzing threats and their ability to move from soft to hard security, and honestly assessing existing capabilities, these are preconditions for a more rational European approach to security. Without this, the chances of getting entangled in the same traps are very high. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. And if you want to contact with me, you have all necessary information at the slide. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you like it.